If you've ever felt like you're living a life that wasn't quite yours or carrying burdens you didn't choose, then you're in the right place. I'm Barbie Wolf, and this is Unboxing Barbie, the podcast for cycle breakers and comrades with our boots on the ground. It's a space for honest conversations about healing, faith, and about becoming who we were always meant to be. Let's unpack some things together. Hey, welcome back to Unboxing Barbie. Grab your cuppa, settle in, and imagine we're sitting on my couch looking out a beautiful window because today we're going to talk about some hard things. But we're going to do it with love, grace, and hopefully with a kind of honesty that actually heals. Also, the JPM, Jesus per minute, ratio for this show has already exceeded quota because of the current state of the union. The only people I want to apologize to, though, are those who don't have a great relationship with that name or person. But I can't not talk about these things. It's all just hitting too close to home. I was raised by a single mother who had her own faith, her own way of trying to make sense of the world. But she also had a complicated relationship with substances and men. And the faith community largely ostracized her for it. From the outside, her moral compass probably didn't look like much of a compass at all. But she was doing the best she could with what she had. Fast forward to 1997. I'm in a battered women's shelter with my 7-year-old daughter, having just come out of multiple abusive relationships. I was trying to rebuild my life from nothing. That's when I walked into an Assemblies of God church, and I felt something that I hadn't felt in years: safety, love, and acceptance. These people welcomed me and my little broken family with open arms. They told me Jesus loved me just as I was. They surrounded me with community and purpose. I thought I had found our sanctuary. And in many ways, I had found safety from the immediate physical danger and just constant chaos we'd been in. But what I didn't realize at the time was that I had jumped from one form of control and exploitation into another. I had moved from a frying pan into a fire that burned differently but still burned. As a single mother trying to survive and provide for my tiny little family, I threw myself completely into this new faith community. I tithed faithfully, giving 10% of everything I made, even when that meant choosing between paying bills and being obedient to God. I volunteered constantly. We were at church every time the doors were open. Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night, youth group, worship team rehearsal, women's ministry, outreach events, you name it. I thought I was being a good Christian mother. I thought I was showing my children what it meant to put God first. But what I was actually doing was being absent from their lives in pursuit of religious acceptance and fulfillment. I was so busy serving the church and staying out of trouble that I wasn't fully present for my own children. And here's where it gets hard to talk about. Because in my absence, in that place that was supposed to be our sanctuary, harm came to one of my children. The details aren't mine to share, but the consequences of my choices are. While I was busy being the perfect church volunteer, my little girl was learning that institutions mattered more to me than she did. And what was one of the drivers of my absence? The constant pressure to perform, to serve, and to give. It all came back to that 10%. Let me pause here and talk about tithing because for me, it wasn't just about money. It was about the time, the energy, the focus it stole from my family in the name of God. Years later, when I finally had the space to breathe and question, I started digging into the things I had accepted as gospel. And what I found shattered something in me. And I'm still trying to sort that all out. But if you can imagine me sitting at my table, Bible open, commentary spread all around, every kind of research I could be doing, and I realized there's not one single verse in the New Testament that commands Christians to tithe. Not one. The word tithing appears exactly 3 times in the entire New Testament, in Matthew 23:23, Luke 11:42, and Luke 18:12. And every single time, Jesus was criticizing the Pharisees for obsessing over tithing while neglecting justice, mercy, and faithfulness. He wasn't establishing tithing as a command for Christians. When Jesus told the Pharisees, you should have practiced the latter without neglecting the former regarding tithing, he wasn't establishing a new principle for us. He was speaking to the Jews who were still under Old Testament law, and he was rebuking them for obsessing over religious rules while ignoring justice, mercy, and faithfulness. And here's something that floored me. Even in the Old Testament system that churches claim to follow, the actual tithe wasn't even 10%. When you added together all the required tithes, it was at least 20% annually. So not only are churches imposing an Old Testament law on Christians everywhere, we're not even doing it accurately. Then I learned something about the pastoral epistles. 1 Timothy, 2 Timothy, and Titus, the very passages churches use to justify pastoral salaries. I discovered that most biblical scholars agree that Paul didn't even write them. They were likely written decades after his death by followers trying to establish institutional authority. The real Paul, in his authentic letters, actually worked as a tent maker specifically to avoid being a financial burden. He told the Ephesian elders that he supplied his own needs and the needs of his companions, never teaching them to give him tithes. If tithing was so important, why didn't he teach it or practice it? And get this, the research shows that tithes weren't even called for in the early church for hundreds of years. The scholars literally say it was only when she became corrupt that they started demanding tithes. The institutional requirement for tithing didn't even appear in the church until over 500 years after Christ, at the Council of Tours in 567 AD. This wasn't ancient biblical truth. It was a medieval church politics that often had me choosing between having a few extra groceries and being obedient to a nefarious and abusive system. Still, the most beautiful picture for me of this, though, is the story Jesus tells about the widow. He's in the temple watching people put money into the treasury, and the rich are throwing in huge, impressive amounts. Then this widow comes in and puts in 2 tiny copper coins. They were literally everything she had to live on. And Jesus stops everything and says she gave more than all of them. Why? Because her gift wasn't about fulfilling a percentage. It was about the posture of her heart. And here's what's crucial. Jesus wasn't praising the religious system that was taking her last dollar. He was honoring her radical, sacrificial love while critiquing the very system that exploited her poverty. I was that widow, giving my last while struggling. That's the kind of generosity, though, I believe in. One that comes from a place of freedom and love, not from fear and obligation. You know, something that I think is also interesting, while I was researching tithing and digging into what the Bible actually says about giving, I discovered something that stopped me in my tracks. In virtually every major faith tradition on earth, not just Christianity, feeding the hungry is considered one of the highest forms of spiritual practice. In Sikhism, there's a beautiful tradition called Langar. Probably saying that wrong. It's a community kitchen in every Gurdwara where everyone, regardless of religion, caste, wealth, background, can come and receive a free meal. Everyone sits on the floor as equals. The Golden Temple in Amritsar feeds 100,000 people per day. They don't ask questions. They don't means test. They just feed people because that's what love does. In Islam, zakat, charitable giving is one of the 5 pillars of the faith, and feeding the hungry is explicitly part of that obligation. In Judaism, the concept of tzedakah isn't charity, it's justice, a moral obligation to care for those in need. In Buddhism and Hinduism, feeding others is considered one of the most meritorious acts you can perform. And in Christianity, Jesus was absolutely clear about this. I was hungry and you fed me. Not, I was hungry and you checked if I deserved to eat. Not, I was hungry and you made sure I wasn't using food stamps to buy the wrong things. Just, I was hungry and you fed me. Here's what breaks my heart. While all these other faith traditions across the world recognize feeding the hungry as sacred work, here in the United States, the wealthiest nation in human history, currently we are actively taking food assistance away from families who need it. SNAP benefits are being cut. School lunch programs are under attack. We're putting conditions and stigma on something that every major religion says should be given freely. And where is the church in all this? The same church that taught me I had to tithe 10%, even when I couldn't afford groceries. Too often, we're silent. Or worse, some of us, and I use that term us loosely, are supporting the policies that create more hunger in the name of personal responsibility or not enabling dependency. Can you see the disconnect? We weaponize giving within our own walls, demanding tithes, creating guilt, building bigger buildings while people in our own communities are going hungry. Meanwhile, sick communities are feeding anyone who walks through their doors. No questions asked, living out the very values Jesus taught better than many of us who claim his name. The early church in Acts, they sold their possessions and shared with anyone who had need. Not just church members, anyone. That's the model. That's what authentic generosity looks like. It's not a percentage, it's not performance. It's seeing hunger and responding with food. Seeing need and responding with the abundance we already have. Not because you have to, but because love compels you. Now listen, I need to be honest. I used to be one of these people. I used to think things like, well, if they just make better choices, or I don't want my tax dollars going to people who waste it. I judged. I made assumptions about who deserved help and who didn't. So I'm not pointing fingers from some moral high ground. I'm looking in a mirror and recognizing how much I've had to unlearn. And let me be clear about something else, please, because I don't want this to sound like I'm anti-tithing or anti-giving or anti-supporting churches and ministries. I'm not. I still give. I still support ministries that align with what I believe Jesus actually taught. If a congregation wants to financially support their pastor, that's beautiful, especially when it's done cheerfully and freely. What I'm opposed to is making it a command, making it an ordinance, creating guilt and obligation where there should be freedom and joy. There's a world of difference between I give because love compels me and I give because I'll be disobedient to God if I don't. One comes from abundance, the other from fear. The 10% can be a helpful guide if it works for you, but it shouldn't be a chain. And more importantly, our giving, however much it is, should reflect what Jesus actually cared about: justice, mercy, feeding the hungry, caring for the vulnerable, not building empires while people go without food. That's the kind of generosity I want to practice. The kind that looks more like Lingar and less like ledgers. The kind that asks, how can I help? Instead of, do they deserve it? The kind that recognizes we're all just trying to make it. And sometimes the most sacred thing we can do is share what we have. Now, by 2005, my daughter was 15 and my son was 17. I had been developing a close relationship with a man. We were platonic, and we were trying to live a pure Christian life until we weren't. And when the church discovered our relationship, they had a path of repentance that was tricky to navigate. My son, at such a formative time in his life, watched his mother be decimated by the very community that had promised unconditional love. The path of self-destruction that followed was devastating to watch. My daughter, who had already been struggling with the trauma from her earlier years, and now she was watching our family implode under the weight of religious judgment. Surveying the damage for our family didn't begin until years later, when we could sit around a table and honestly talk about the ways I had harmed them, my kids, in my pursuit for belonging, in the form of religious performance. It seems, though, that that's where real restoration happens, not in church discipline or public shaming, but in honest conversation and genuine vulnerability. Stepping outside this rigid thinking feels disorienting on some levels and completely effortless at the same time. But here's what's beautiful to me, anyway, and this is where my understanding has completely transformed. The values that Jesus embodied aren't unique to Christianity. They're written into the fabric of what it means to be human. Think about it. Compassion, justice, care for the vulnerable, love for enemies. These show up everywhere. Buddhist monks practicing radical compassion, Muslim communities caring for refugees, indigenous wisdom traditions teaching reverence for all creation, secular humanists fighting for human dignity and equality. It's almost like there was some original spiritual truth embedded in humanity from the very beginning. And as we spread across the world, different cultures develop different languages and symbols to express those same fundamental realities. What if Christ consciousness isn't owned by Christianity, but Christianity is just one expression of it? What if Jesus felt so similar to people because he wasn't introducing foreign concepts, but awakening something that was already written in their hearts? And here's a heartbreaking irony. While other faith traditions are quietly living out Christ-like values, drilling wells in Africa, caring for the poor, working for peace, winning Nobel Prizes for compassion and justice, some exclusive and legalistic church cultures are pointing fingers and declaring everyone else wrong. I remember being in a class at my church where they literally taught us how all of the other religions on the planet were wrong except ours. Meanwhile, those wrong religions were often embodying the very values Jesus taught better than we were. They're solving water crises and feeding the hungry, while some Christians are more concerned about who's saved and who's damned. And the cost isn't just theological, it's devastatingly personal. While other faith communities are saving lives, children in exclusive and legalistic church cultures are literally dying. Suicide rates among LGBTQ plus youth in conservative religious families are staggering. Kids are turning to drugs, self-harm, and worse because they can't be who they are and still receive their family's love. My own daughter's path into addiction wasn't a moral failure. It was a traumatized child's attempt to cope with unbearable pain in an environment that prioritized religious performance over genuine love and safety. I want you to think about something for a moment. Children are born without any concept that they have flaws. A baby doesn't look in the mirror and think, I'm too fat, I'm not smart enough, or there's something fundamentally wrong with me. Children learn they're flawed when someone else teaches them that concept. Similarly, children growing up in abusive homes don't realize their environment is abusive until someone from the outside helps them see it differently. What feels normal to them? The walking on eggshells, the fear, the chaos. That's just home until they experience something different. I want to paint another picture. Imagine a family deeply embedded in exclusive church culture. The parents vote a certain way, believe certain things about who's who, who's in, who's out, who's saved, who's not. They've heard countless sermons about those people, the LGBTQ plus community, the liberals, the ones supposedly destroying society. And now imagine their child, say born in the 80s, growing up, hearing all of this us versus them messaging. This child absorbs years of teaching about how they are the problem, the sinners, the dangerous others. But then imagine this child becomes an adult and begins to explore their own identity, their own sexuality. They realize something devastating. They are one of them. All those years of demonizing messages suddenly become very personal. Can you imagine the internal torment? It's like being told your whole life that the sea is poison, only to realize one day you have gills and you were always born to swim. The choice between authenticity and family acceptance? The weight of carrying that secret while listening to sermons that condemn your very existence? This is where the work of reparenting comes in, both for ourselves and for the people we've harmed with our certainty. Because here's what I've learned. The same Jesus who said, by their fruits or by their love, you will know them. You'll know that they're mine. He also spent his time with the people the religious leaders rejected. Jesus continually, consistently chose people over rules, love over reputation, mercy over judgment. He had more to say about caring for the poor and loving your enemies than about sexual morality or religious performance. He drove money changers out of the temple, but he welcomed in the woman caught in adultery. When I look at my daughter now, sober, strong, rebuilding her life, I see someone who understands grace and redemption in ways that put most church people to shame. She's learning what it means to be genuinely loved without conditions because we're doing the hard work of learning how to love that way. When I observe my son as a father and how he moves in our community and just the way he lives his life, I feel proud for the way he's taking care of the trail and making it a better and more beautiful place for the people who are coming behind him. Years ago, I heard a speaker. I wish I could remember her name. She talked about how Christians were boycotting Disney over various cultural issues. Her message was revolutionary to me. What if we blessed Hollywood instead of cursing them? What if we spoke prayers of blessing over them instead of boycotting them? Could you imagine what would happen if we blessed the people we thought were not walking in God's ways rather than condemning them? That message has stayed with me for decades because it represents everything I've learned about what authentic faith looks like. Instead of cancel culture, what about connection culture? Instead of building walls, perhaps we could build some bridges. So, what does this look like practically? How do we start building bridges instead of walls? I suggest we start with curiosity instead of judgment. When you see someone struggling, an unhoused neighbor, a socially withdrawn teenager, the non binary child being kicked out of their home, instead of asking, what do they do wrong? Ask what happened. Where's their pain? What do they need? Practice the Jesus test on your reactions if you follow him. When you feel judgment rising up in yourself, ask, how would Jesus actually respond to or care for this person? Not church Jesus, but the Jesus who touched lepers and ate with tax collectors. Give anyway. If someone asks for your help and you're worried about how they'll use it, give anyway. That's between them and God. Your job is to love, not to control outcomes. Listen more than you speak, perhaps. When someone shares their story, resist the urge to fix or advise. I am so preaching to myself here. But it would be helpful if we could just listen with love. I think it would be great if we questioned our certainties. When we catch ourselves thinking, I know what God thinks about this, pause and ask, do I really? What if love is bigger than my understanding? Someone recently asked me what my unique magic is, and I'm still trying to answer that question. But one thing that I did sense immediately as I began to ponder it is this. I do see myself as a bridge between many different perspectives. But it's a bridge with hand ropes and ladders down for people who are trying to find their way across the gap between maybe a rigid faith they grew up with and the expansive love that maybe they're discovering or that I feel like God is leading us all to. You don't have to abandon Jesus to embrace love. You don't have to throw away your faith to question harmful interpretations of it. You can stay connected to the Holy Spirit while recognizing that Spirit moves in ways and places you might not expect. Today, my daughter lives with us. She's rebuilding her life one day at a time. My son is thriving. We're learning what it means to be a connected family, not a perfect one, but an honest one. We push through the hard places and have the hard conversations because that's where healing lives. The church that kicked me out all those years ago, I honestly harbor no resentment toward them. They were doing what they thought was right based on what their tenets were and their leadership wanted them to do. But I do hope they've learned, as I have, that love is always a better teacher than shame. So here's my invitation to those with an opinion on sin. What if the real sin isn't being gay or struggling with addiction or asking hard questions about faith? What if the real sin is using God's name to cause suffering instead of healing it? What if instead of weaponizing sin to control and exclude people, we recognize that we're all broken and we're all trying to find our way, and we all need grace. What if we stopped burning bridges and started building them? The least of these that Jesus talked about, they're not those people over there. They're our children, our neighbors, our own hearts, if we're honest about our own struggles. They're the parts of ourselves we've been taught to be ashamed of. But here's the beautiful truth. It's not a new one. There is no condemnation for those who are in Christ Jesus. Not for the struggling single mom, not for the addicted teenager, not for the kid who looks different than your version of normal, who is trying to reconcile their faith and their identity. Love wins. Love always wins. And sometimes love looks like unpacking the weaponized sin that's been keeping us from seeing each other clearly. Because here's the thing. The moment we decide we're qualified to judge someone else's sin, we've already picked up a weapon. The judgment is the weapon. I talked about tithing and sacrificial service today, but those are just symptoms. They're just a couple of ways that the capital C church has gotten it wrong by trading the radical, messy, unconditional love of Jesus for a set of rules that keep some of us comfortable and in control. Thanks for sitting on this couch with me today, for looking out this window at the beautiful view of what's possible when we choose connection over cancellation, blessing over boycotting, love over law. I'm Barbie Wolf, and this has been Unboxing Barbie. Until next time, keep doing the hard work of healing. Keep asking the hard questions. Keep building those bridges. Please remember, you are loved exactly as you are, not as you should be, because none of us are as we should be, and we are all becoming. And honestly, that's enough. I love you. See you soon. And as always, if you have thoughts and you want to stay kind in your conversation, I want to hear them. Carry on, comrade.